18 months ago, it came in on a flatbed. Today, it's flat out awesome. Ranger Resurrection is back to be plumbed, wired, and fired. Plus, wacky traditions and wild rides highlight the 57th annual Swamp Buggy races. That and more right now on Xtreme 4x4.
Welcome to Xtreme 4x4, and you guessed it, we're nearing the end of Project Ranger Resurrection, our Swiss Army knife of trucks, basically built to handle anything that we can throw at it.
We've been working on this truck for a really long time, and today we will finally be able to hear the small block in between those custom frame rails breathe life. I can't wait.
This truck started with what we thought was going to be a pretty simple plan. Drag a Ford Ranger out of a junkyard, bring it to the shop, strip it down, and turn it into a hardcore off-road truck. So we pulled in a completely thrashed pickup and started to tear it apart. We ditched the back half of the frame and mounted it to our frame jig.
And this is what replaced the stock frame, a custom rear tube cage that I'm going to paint with POWERBLOCK. Because when you live in an area with a lot of moisture in the air, or even sometimes worse, winter, you got to seal up that raw metal before it begins to rust. But it took a lot of work to get that truck to a point where it was ready for tube. To accomplish everything we wanted to with this truck, we needed it to be an extended cab. This would give us a longer wheelbase and a place to mount the radiator in the back. And we thought, how hard can it be to convert it, since all it took was a trip to the parts store for some body panels and a whole bunch of trimming and fitting and grinding, fitting and more trimming and grinding, and finally some welding. It was no big deal.
And with the cab taken care of, it was time to build in some protection for both the driver and, of course, the passenger. And with a plan in hand, we started with a pile of 1 5/8 DOM tubing and began to build a custom roll cage. With the main hoop in place, we added a halo bar and some down tubes in the front, plus a cool extra Xtreme in the windshield that will also act as our tack mount. Then we added some 5-point safety harnesses to keep us planted in our Mastercraft suspension seats, and the best thing of all, window nets. Now at that point, obviously the interior was still missing some stuff. It didn't have a dash or wiring or any gauges. So today, we're going to install these Stewart Warner Maximum Performance gauges. Now these are all full electric gauges with very precise competition sending units. And the best thing is we're going to be able to convert these smaller gauges over from a standard bulb to a super bright LED. And we're going to mount those in this. This is a carbon fiber dash from Perry's Fab & Fiber, made specifically for the Ranger. Now the best thing is this thing is ultra light and ultra strong. So strong, in fact, if you had an automatic transmission, you can actually mount the shifter right to that console.
But this truck was not an automatic, so once we had the cage built, it was time to deal with the drivetrain. It all started with the Ford Performance Solution V8 that was built by the horsepower crew. It pushed 435 horsepower and 457 foot-pounds of torque on the dyno. And once we had it at Xtreme, we mated it to a new Venture Gear 4500 and then an MP271 transfer case.
Now these gauges are going to monitor that small block with ease, but when it comes to the power distribution for the rest of this truck, we're going to use Painless Performance 6-circuit off-road wiring harness. Now this harness comes with this aluminum bezel that went ahead and mounted on the dash, and it has these little waterproof boots for the switches. And the best thing is, instead of fuses, it uses a circuit breaker. So if you have a short circuit out on the trail, you just have to fix it, reset it, and we're on our way. Now with this mounted on the dash, it's almost done, but this dash isn't the only piece of fiberglass we got from Perry's Fab & Fiber. With the rear frame rails welded to the original frame, we built a full tube rear section to carry the fuel cell and our rear mounted radiator, and 2 spare tires just in case. Then with a tube frame in place, we finally were able to mount the fiberglass bed sides and 1-piece front end. And we could start setting the ride height and begin designing the suspension.
But of course, a suspension isn't any good without a set of axles underneath of them. And when a huge crate from Dynatrack arrived, we couldn't wait to open it because inside was a pair of Dana 60s. Fitted with 513 gears and ARB air lockers front and rear, we set the ride height for the truck, bolted on the American Racing 20-inch Mojave wheels and the 38 Toyos. Then all we had to do was build the rear trailing arms and the front forelinks for the truck. And then once the axles were underneath the truck, we could measure for the shocks. But before we can even turn those axles once, we need to get that engine fired, and that requires some plumbing. We're going to be using Earl's Dash 8 feed and return from the fuel cell.
And with this dash finished up, and thank you, and you guys caught up into what it took to get this truck to this stage, we're one step closer to getting this thing on the trail.
Oh yeah, and so is that dash.
Coming up, part boat, part 4x4. Swamp buggy races, next.
Welcome back to Xtreme 4x4. We're about ready to dive back onto Ranger Resurrection to plumb it, wire it, and fire it in, say, a matter of, 15 minutes?
That's the magic of TV. And today, inside our little window into the off-road world, we're going off-road, way off-road and into the swamp for some hardcore racing with a splash.
The Everglades is a tranquil place where birds frolic and alligators roam in the still of the Florida swamp.
3 times a year, that peace is shattered when Florida Sports Park hosts the Swamp Buggy races.
To drive one is just awesome. It is a thrill of a lifetime.
There's no roller coaster, no dragster, no any kind of machine out there that can turn you on like a swamp buggy can.
From its humble beginnings in 1949, swamp buggy racing is now part of South Florida's racing heritage.
We live, breathe, eat swamp buggy racing.
It's the only place that they race these things. People up north and from other parts of the country have never seen anything like this.
You get a little bit hydroplane, drag racing, circle track, kind of all, put into one. It's real exciting.
It is pretty hardcore.
Hurtling through 18 inches of water side by side, hardcore is an understatement.
When you're in the buggy, all you can see is straight ahead. You really don't have a peripheral view, but if he's right there and he's coming up on you, you can see him, and then when you know that, you know you gotta put it pedal to the metal and go.
And the 2- and 4-wheel drive classes have pedal.
We're running about 840 horsepower. We're flying through the water somewhere between 70 and 80 miles an hour. There's no room for air. You make a little bobble and they guys blow by you. It is extreme.
30 years ago, Randy John's race career was cut short.
Back when I was 18 years old, I raced a couple times. Second time I ran, I flipped over and my dad wouldn't let me race anymore after that. That was the end of my racing career.
He returned to the swamp 4 years ago to race the Top Gun machine.
You get the bug and you can't get rid of it.
Randy didn't return alone, enlisting his wife Lori to pilot Lady Liberty.
Having her in this race with us and doing this, you can't complain about how much it costs.
And his son Tyler mans the controls of the Patriot.
The families don't work together very well all the time, but we usually do all right.
With only 1 day of practice, this event would test the fortitude of the Johns family.
Today, Saturday, is the only day you get to practice right before Sunday, so if you tear something up or it's not right, you gotta do all your adjustments today. If you break something tomorrow, you're pretty much done.
It's very intense. It's very nerve-wracking, and it's a full-time job trying to keep up with all these buggies and keep them working.
Things turned sour early when Lori had problems in the first practice session.
We don't seem to be shifting very well at all.
After blowing the gears in his first practice, it didn't get any better for Tyler on his second run.
Check that gear. That gear's wrong. That gear's wrong. Let's go. Jack it up. Check it. It's got to be wrong. It's not 18 to 1. This thing, it's got to be a 15 to 1.
What's it turning?
Huh?
$5 grand, not even.
Yeah, there's something wrong. I put the gears in upside down. I did that myself.
Just blew $1,000.
I know.
Just like that.
That was our money. Well, when you put the gears in upside down, you got a name for that. It's called dumbass.
No, it don't bother me because he put so much work into it. He's trying to look after all 3 of our buggies. It's a simple mistake. Anybody would make it.
It's been kind of a frustrating day because we've had problems. A lot of people don't make it around the track today, and they're just as aggravated and disgusted as we are. So go home, work on them tonight, and hopefully we make up for it tomorrow.
On race day, expectations weren't high.
We hope we can keep it all together long enough to get around the track.
To win 10 grand, they would have to keep it together and survive the single eliminations. Lori was the team's first casualty, but Randy wasn't disappointed.
She got the race bug. She wants to race. She wants to win. She wants to be a competitor.
In the quarterfinals, Randy fell, leaving the family's fortune to Tyler. The 22-year-old didn't crumble under pressure as he knocked off some of the world's best.
No, I'm not feeling cocky.
In the final big feature race, a last-second surge past 7-time champion Eddie Chesser gave Tyler the victory.
We outpowered him and took first. After yesterday, the only place we had to was to go up. We couldn't go down any further.
Along with the fame and fortune, Tyler's win earned him the traditional jump with the Swamp Buggy Queen.
Oh, it is every racer's goal. That's, if you dunk clean, you won it all. You did it.
Do you think there's any gators in that swamp there, Jess?
I don't think that they would throw a Swamp Buggy Queen into a swamp with gators in it.
That's a good point. I think if I had a swamp buggy, I'd call it the Crocodile Hunter. Crikey!
These fiberglass panels are designed to replace your stock bedside, which means they have provisions for stock taillights. But because our donor truck didn't even have a bed, we grabbed a set of headlight and taillight assemblies from APC.
Now the wiring harness in this truck is actually one of the easiest ones we've ever had to design. With only 6 circuits to worry about, we only have to pull enough wires into the back to hook up the main power feed to the battery, and then of course the feeds for the relays for the electric fuel pump, as well as the electric fan, and a power feed out to the tail lights. Now if we pop a circuit breaker with this thing out on the trail, it's going to be pretty simple to chase through this harness, find the problem, fix it, and get back behind the driver's seat. But what happens if you got a really complex wiring harness and you keep popping fuses? We got a little trick to show you how to find the problem. Now you've seen us wire up every single project here at Xtreme, but when it comes to actually diagnosing or building a harness, it's still one of the most popular technical questions that we ever get asked. So to shed some light on the topic, I went ahead and pre-wired some of the circuits that we're going to be using in our Ranger, but on a lot smaller scale here on the table. Now the main power feed obviously starts at the positive battery terminal, but to get the power for our switches, we're going to attach a 10 gauge wire to the big terminal on the starter. And then inside the switch box, we're going to split it off into all the switches, first going through the circuit breakers. But for this little mock-up, I went ahead and just installed these fuses. The 12-volt feed is then switched by the switches that are mounted up into the dash for things like our tail lights, the off-road lights will be mounting up on the roof and on the front bumper, the ignition box, and then a couple of bare feeds running in the back to run the relays for the cooling fan as well as the electric fuel pump. Now everything inside your harness is going to need a ground. And on our Ranger, we're going to use the chassis as the ground. Same way we're doing on this table. All we have to do is hook up the negative ground cable up to a piece of metal, and then everything else can just attach to the same piece. Now when you blow the fuse in your circuit, it's most commonly caused by a dead short. What a dead short means is that the power coming through the fuse and then through the switch has no load. It's not making it to the light that it has to turn on. So when you go ahead and turn on your switch, it blows a fuse like this. Now these dead shorts are often caused by the insulation on the wire basically wearing off where the wire passes past some metal, usually through a firewall or around the frame. And this causes a dead short because it goes right to ground, just like this little bare piece of wire right here. Now although this is easy to find with this harness sitting on the table, finding something that small when the harness is strewn through the whole truck can be near impossible. So this is where that little tip comes in. All you got to do is take a standard headlight and attach 2 wires to it, one to the ground and one to the low beam. This is going to reintroduce that load into the circuit that we don't have that's causing this fuse to blow. All we do is replace the fuse with the wires from the headlight, and this will help us diagnose the problem. Now this switch should be turning on these lights, but it's not. It's blowing the fuse. And when I turn the switch now, it turns on our headlight. That means we have a dead short. All you got to do now is go around the truck and wiggle the wires, and once that light goes out, we know we found the problem. All we got to do now is repair this. We're back on the trail.
Another problem area in harnesses that could be hard to find or fix is a bad relay. And we're going to have 4 of them in this truck. 2 for the off-road lights, 1 for the electric fan, and 1 for the fuel pump. You want to use a relay when the item that you are powering draws enough current to possibly burn out the contacts inside of the switch. And that's usually anything over 30 amps. The power from the switch on the dash will go to one terminal, usually marked by a number 85 on the relay. The matching terminal, number 86, will be grounded. Now inside the relay is a small electromagnet that is powered by the switch. which causes the internal switch to throw, and that's the click you hear inside of the relay. When turned on, the relay allows a high level of current to flow from terminal number 30 to terminal number 87 to, let's say, the fuel pump. But what happens when it goes out? You're obviously not going to be going anywhere. So if the circuit breaker or the fuse is all right, it's time to check your relay. And you should have power coming from both the switch and the main power feed. And if you do, then you probably have a bad relay. A simple temporary fix is to jump the relay with a cotter pin. This will take the place of both the switch and the relay. The power will run from the battery through the cotter pin and onto the fuel pump. Now, if the relay is the problem, when you contact the pin to the terminals, you'll hear the fuel pump run. Now remember, not to leave the jumper in place, because not only will it kill the battery, but if it is your fuel pump, you're going to flood the engine.
Stay tuned. Ian and Jesse will be right back to fire up this beast when Xtreme 4x4 continues.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Xtreme 4x4.
Well, we're almost ready to fire the engine inside the Ranger here, getting this truck one step closer to being on the trail after being in the shop what feels like forever.
The last thing we need to bolt up to the engine is this set of BBK headers, but we're going to mount them in an unusual way, upside down and backwards. That way we can run the exhaust pipe in front of the engine, meet up with the passenger side, and then into 3.5-inch pipe from Flowmaster. For clearance on our spark plugs, we have to cut the bridges off of our headers. The exhaust will run down under the floor on the passenger side. Into a Flowmaster Super 40, and then finally out the side of our extended cab panel.
All right, with the wiring and the fuel all hooked up, we can do what we've been waiting to do for a long time.
The next time you see Ranger Resurrection, all we have to do is a couple more things like the steering, the shocks, the
springs, drive shafts, and some brake stuff. And then I know we said this tons of times, but it's been a lot of work, and you're actually gonna see us pay this thing off on the trail, so it was all worth it.
We gotta go play next week, and I hope you come with us.
Just a little excited.
It's been a year and a half, dude.